Okay, so we've just enabled nested virtualization and installed Hyper-V on two of our servers here, DM1 and DM2. Now, next thing I need to do is I need to, well, first off, there's probably something we're going to have to fix. So I've already fixed it, but I want to show you where it's at. So I'm going to hop into, this is, oh, let's do this one, DM1. So one of the things that'll happen when in your test environment, particularly if you don't have a dedicated network adapter for Hyper-V to use, it will seize control of your one adapter and it'll set it to um, receive an address via DHCP, and so you're going to break network connection. So the way you fix that, you just come in to configure this local server, and you'll notice how here, instead of your standard Ethernet, you've got virtual Ethernet Microsoft Hyper-V adapter, and this would be set to DHCP enabled. And that doesn't work. So you have to come in here and reset your IP address. Now notice I've got the two. This is my physical adapter, but Hyper-V has taken over that and he's using that as a switch. In fact, if we open up Hyper-V Manager and look at Virtual Switch Manager, we're going to see right here is our Hyper-V virtual switch that connects to an external network. So that's what happened. This took it over. And so if you're just using that one, you don't have dedicated adapters for Hyper-V, and you're just using that one and you're sharing it amongst everything, you're going to need to go in and reset your IP address. But it's not a huge issue. Okay, I'm going to leave this up, but I'm going to go to DM2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here real quick. I'm going to create a virtual machine here inside Hyper-V, and it's going to be hosted on DM1, but I want to replicate it to DM2. So don't worry about these warnings. It's something I haven't gotten around to fixing yet, but it's not going to impact what we're doing, so I don't care at the moment. So I need to set this thing up as a replica server. So I'm going to go to Manage, and I'm not going to go to Manage. I'm going to go to Tools. I already, by the way, have fixed my IP address here. So this is set and ready to go. So I'm going to go to Tools and Hyper-V Manager. And in Hyper-V Manager, I need to configure this server as a replica server. So I'm going to right-click on my server and go to Hyper-V settings. I just looked at it 3 times and didn't read it correctly. Good grief. I'm going to go to Hyper-V settings. And in Hyper-V settings, down here is my replication configuration. And this is where I'm going to enable replication. So that's going to allow other Hyper-V servers to replicate their virtual machines here. So enable replication, then what do I want for authentication? So I can use certificate-based authentication or Kerberos authentication. And Kerberos is the one I want to use because I've got all of these things on a domain. Now, key thing here, replication can happen without the Hyper-V servers being on the same domain. It's not a big deal. We might have to use a different type of authentication. We might try to use some certificate-based authentication for that. But since I have them all on the same domain already, I'm just going to use Kerberos, and that's going to make my life easier. And then I need to specify who's allowed to replicate here. So this option is anybody who replicates or anybody who authenticates can replicate. This one says I'm only going to allow authenticate or replication from specific servers, whether they authenticate with me or not. Now, that's probably not a bad idea. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and allow replication from any authenticated server just to give us a nice, easy configuration so we can see how this works. I click apply, and it says, hey, this is not going to work unless we create a rule in the firewall. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of Windows applications, if they have to create a rule, they will assume Windows Firewall and they will just create the rule. This one does not. This tells you what we need, and it will tell you exactly if you are using Windows Firewall, enable, and it gives you the exact rule. But if you're not, we need to ensure an inbound TCP exception for port 80, which is typically web traffic. So we can't be running this on the same thing that we're running a web server on, but that would be weird anyway. Don't do that. So what I need to do is open up my Windows firewall, find the Hyper-V Replica HTTP Listener TCP/in rule, and enable it. It's already there. I just have to enable it. So I'm going to right-click, open, go to my Windows firewall, go to my advanced settings. It's going to pop up down here, and I'm looking for inbound rules, and I'm looking for, here we are, Hyper-V Replica HTTP inbound listener. Notice I've actually created two of them here, one for HTTP and one for HTTPS. So I'm going to enable that rule, and that should allow my replication partners to be able to replicate data to me. So I'm going to hit OK, and OK. Now at this point, no virtual machines here. However, this is set up as a replica partner. So what I should be able to do now is go to another Hyper-V server, create a virtual machine, and have it replicated over here. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go to DM1. And here, now, just a real quick aside, I'm flipping back and forth between servers. I could just easily right here and connect to another server and have both of them here and be able to flip back and forth just by using this. Honestly, that is best practice. That is what I would do in any other circumstance. In this case, I'm flipping back and forth between servers just to make it a little more obvious that I'm jumping from one server to the next. But if you're doing this and you're replicating this little project, definitely right-click, connect to another server, put in the name of the other server, and just hop back and forth between them here. Okay, then you just got to make sure you're selected on the right one, and you're all set. So I'm going to create a new virtual machine. So new virtual machine, and to make this easy, I'm going to make this really quick and easy. So this is going to be, where say replicate is going to be the name of our server. Capitalize that so I feel better about myself. We're going to make it Gen 2. Memory, 1 gig is fine. We're not actually going to fire it up. We're just going to watch it replicate. Configure networking. Let's connect it to our outgoing switch. Virtual hard disk, replicate, that's fine. We want this to be a dynamically expanding disk because we want it to make it fast and easy for it to replicate. And then we're going to install an operating system later, and bingo. So this gives us a real quick, real fast, and for our purposes, very small virtual machine. Now, we need to replicate it or enable replication on it because it's automatically going to replicate once we get it going. So I can right click and enable replication. I also have down here, if this is selected, I have an enable replication. Both of them take me to the exact same spot. All right, before you begin, yep, we know. All right, specify the replica server. Who are we replicating to? I'm going to do a browse here. I'm going to search for Bassett 301-DM2 and tell it to check name, and it found it. Okay, good, we got our server there. Specify connection parameters. Okay, it's already figured out we're using Kerberos. We've got port 80. We figured out the name. Okay, everything is great here. We don't have to use certificate. We can't use certificate-based authentication because the remote server said, no, we're using Kerberos. This one, pay attention to. Compress the data that is transmitted over the network. Replication, depending on what's going on, might take a while. So what we'll do is we'll use a little processor time, compress the data, shoot it across the network, and on the remote side, use a little processor time, uncompress the data, rather than sending more data in an uncompressed form over the network. So if our systems have spare processor time, that makes a lot of sense because you're more likely to stress the network than you are to stress the processor. However, if you are processor bound, so you're stressing your processor, you might want to rethink that. And it might require just playing around with it a little bit, set it one way, run it for a while, set it another way, run it for a while, see which one has the least negative impact on your system. All right, now we can choose which VHDs to replicate. Now, as you know, VHDs can get big, so that becomes a challenge. Do we want to replicate all of our VHDs? In this case, we have a dynamically expanding VHD that we haven't added anything to, so it's going to be fast and easy. But if you have multiple VHDs and you want to replicate them all, great. If there's some of them you don't have to replicate, then don't worry about it. All right, let's go to our replication frequency. How often do we want this to replicate? And we have three options here: every 30 seconds, every 5 minutes, every 15 minutes. Now, faster replication time obviously means if there's a problem and the host computer goes down that's hosting the VM, replicating faster means we're less likely to lose information, or we will lose less information. But it puts more strain on the network. By the way, I probably should have defined this is why we set up replication, is so that we can replicate a virtual machine between two different hosts, and that way it can run on one. And if it goes down, then we can fire it up on the second one and get people back in and operational again. It's a disaster recovery or backup option, not necessarily a good backup option. Think of it more as a disaster recovery option, because we're not necessarily backing up and restoring data. So think of it as a disaster recovery option for your virtual machines that is different from running Hyper-V clustering. So this does not require a cluster configuration in order to work. In fact, you cannot run this and Hyper-V clustering at the same time. Hyper-V clustering will manage virtual machines automatically. This is a little more of a manual process, but it is a viable option for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and leave this at every 5 minutes. We can configure additional recovery points if we want. So you can choose to store only the latest recovery point, or nope, give me coverage for the last 24 hours, maintain volume, or enable the volume shadow copy service. This is if you want more options. So instead of just giving me the last point in time when we did a replication, give me a little bit more. So let's give replication options for 12 hours. And then choose the initial replication. Now, this is a big one because this is your first time replication. When you do your first replication, you have to replicate everything in the virtual machine, including all the data and all the VHDs. And a base Windows install is going to be about 10 gigabytes. So if you haven't done anything else and you've just installed Windows and you go to replicate it, you've got to transfer about 10 gigabytes of data. If the server's been up and running for a while and you got a bunch of things going on, that can get much, much larger. And so how do we move that data from here, from the primary server to the replica server? Now, the initial one is the one we're worried about. After that, it's only replicating changes. It doesn't re-replicate the entire hard drive every single time. So your subsequent replications will be faster, but your first one is going to be the one that's challenging to you. So here are our options. We can send it over the network. Well, that's darn convenient. Might negatively impact network performance for a while, but it is very convenient. The other one is we can use external media. So we can send this VM to an external media. We can go to the other server and say, hey, here's the media for the server, and then it will load that up, and then it will just replicate changes. Now, because we're doing this as a demo and you can't see me actually move external media, we're going to send it across the network. Then we can also specify when do we want this to go. Option number 3 here that I didn't touch on: use an existing virtual machine on the replica server as the initial copy. So let's say I had a VM here that I wanted to replicate to a VM over there, and I had Windows Server on my initial VM. For my replica, I could install a Windows Server, and then I could just replicate everything that was different. So that's what that one's about. Okay, and then I can choose to start replication immediately or set it at a specific time. Now, in this case, it's going to be easy for me to say just do it now because, hey, we're doing a small one. So I'm going to click Next. I'm happy with all of that. Click Finish, and that's going to start my replication. How do I know that it worked? Well, I'm on Bassett 301 DM, and here's my replicate VM, right? So I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to open up my Bassett. Whoops, wrong one. Oh, never mind. I did get the right one. I am on Bassett 301-DM2, and here's my server. It's already replicated across. So again, that's why we did it with very, very minimal, but that gives you an idea of how this works. Now, you really can only have this VM running on one host at a time, right? So the idea is let me have it running on my primary host, and if my primary host goes down, then I can go to my replica and fire up the VMs on my replica and get people back up and running. It's not as fast as clustering, in that clustering, if it sees it go down, it should automatically bring it up. You have to manually do it, but it is a viable option for you if clustering is not something that you want to do or something you have the resources to do.